if the child is exposed to hardship, such as being maltreated, or they're exposed to violence or dysregulation of our own emotions as their caregivers, it can be difficult for them to handle their emotions. So there are many different important benefits to your child learning to practice this skill efficiently. When a child is able to manage their emotions, it helps them get along with their peers. It can prevent depression, aggression, and other dangerous behaviors. Their mental health will be better in general. Academic achievement are crucial skills. Their flexibility of thinking, they will be able to better focus, their control on their impulses, problem solving, independence, and self-discipline. As children mature, they tend to direct their behavior towards a goal. And I think that's the most important part. When we have a hold of our emotions, we can use that to accomplish our goals.
Oh, sorry, I was reading something in the chat.
When it comes to the development of emotional regulation, just like all phases of child development, it does begin with the caregiver relationship. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control. This area in our brain is not fully developed until we reach adulthood. So children at early stages of brain development can be expected to have a little bit more trouble with having the skills needed to manage some of these situations. The development of our brain in general and the prefrontal cortex is slow. It's a gradual development process, and because it is so, it does take time. It doesn't mature until we're about 25 years old. This could render the child to become more vulnerable to adversities, but at the same time, it provides a great potential for extensive learning. Like most, I'm sorry, we can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to jump in the chat really quick because I also had it open. So I noticed that I saw a comment in here, but for some reason I'm only seeing Lindsay's. Sarah had asked the question, what age should we start expecting them to practice this emotional regulation? And I think from my experience, it's never too early to start that emotional regulation. I think, even at infants, we could start talking about our emotions. Obviously, they're not going to comprehend that right away, but as they're growing throughout their entire life, I think it's definitely something that we could start at any time. You start to see a big transition once they're starting to get ready for, TK or kindergarten. They make that big change and they start seeming like, those big kids that they're turning into. And I think that, from my experience, that's kind of a crucial time that we want to focus in on that emotional regulation, especially when they are entering a new program such as TK or kindergarten. They don't have us there with them all day to maybe stop them and identify those regulations. So it's good to have those skills already starting at that age, so when they go to school, they can start practice those on their own as well. And then I just want to jump on to Chrissy's comment as well, talking about that change. So change, especially from maybe household to household, can definitely cause that emotional dysregulation because it's a whole new environment. And even as us as adults, I know when I jump into a new environment, sometimes it takes you a minute to adjust. So I think, focusing on that adjustment too is also important to kind of help with that emotional regulation. That is definitely something to be expected, but I think that's a good time, even when you're receiving them back from another household, to sit down and maybe go over that emotional regulation. And that could even be something as simple as just checking in, Chrissy, how are you doing? how was your, your dad's house? What did you guys do? How did you feel about that? And kind of asking, did you have a good time? And just kind of checking in on their emotions so that transition kind of goes a little bit smoother as well. We'll go on to the next one.
Yes, and when children are very young, their caregivers are essentially, when they're infants, they're co-regulators. They look to us for comfort and to comfort their emotions. And as they get older, they start to become more independent with our help.
Yeah, and emotional regulation, I think, is a lifelong skill as well. We can start it when they're babies, but it's something that we continue to learn. I think it's something as we're going through different phases of life, it might look a little bit different through every phase that you're going through. So it's definitely, I think, a lifelong learning experience as well.
Definitely.
So the first step in kind of starting this emotional regulation is kind of addressing their emotions. So they have to be able to identify and address those emotions before they know what they are. So kind of just starting by, you see a tantrum going on, or you see them getting frustrated, maybe a sibling took a toy or something. So kind of having that moment to kind of get on their level and addressing the emotion. How are you feeling? I mentioned that before, what's going on? Trying to get a conversation started around that emotion. I see that you're getting frustrated. I see that you're upset. And, one thing that I was thinking about during this workshop, putting it together, was we also want to focus on those positive emotions. I know that can be so hard. And as parents and caregivers, we tend to kind of hone in on those negative behaviors, oh, you're angry, or oh, you're sad. But to point out positive emotions. So they're kind of getting both sides, you're playing with your toys and I see that makes you so happy, and oh, we're going somewhere, you're so excited. So making sure we're finding the right balance between negative and positive emotions as well. And, taking that time to just get down on their level is also a really good time for learning moments, to address those emotions, identify them, and then even offering a solution if it is a negative behavior. That gives us time to connect with them and have that learning moment too. All right, so this is just something that we love here in our office. We have an adult feeling well
Yes.
that we kind of look at periodically to kind of focus on our emotional regulation. So this is something that we always like to share. I found a kid version. So this is the feel wheel, and it's best for ages about 5 to 12. And it really helps them expand on their emotions. So, this is something you could print out or have on your phone even. And, if you see them, they're super excited about something. Oh, this is a happy emotion. I see that you're excited. Or even for the negative emotions, I see that you're mad. Why are we mad? Are you frustrated? Are you jealous? Are you annoyed? So it kind of helps, for older kids expand their knowledge on what emotions are too. And I threw in another one as well, that this one over here on the right would be for, younger children, so they can kind of better understand emotions. We say things like disappointed or embarrassed, and they might not necessarily understand what that means. So, kind of giving a facial expression to go with it kind of helps understand a little bit better. I'm going to pop in the chat really quick and see. I saw something pop up. Oh, yeah, awesome. Okay, so you see Chrissy in there saying, she asks questions. I think that's really great. And, as Claudia mentioned, emotional regulation doesn't happen overnight. As adults, I think it's something we have to think about even every single day. So I think that's a really great start. I think that's really good. All right, so just a quick question for everybody, if anybody wants to jump in. How have you been able to help your kids identify emotions? I know everybody does it kind of differently. I love the feel wheel, so that's something that I definitely use in my household. Asking children questions.
Christy says she has an emotional chart, sort of like the feel wheel that we just mentioned. She likes to ask her children, her toddlers, plenty of questions.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of, like with the feel wheel, something that I noticed is kind of bringing that attention to it. Why are we feeling this way? Because I feel like even for me, once you notice your emotion, you can kind of step back, and that kind of almost grounds you to the sense of like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And then, where can we go from there? And I think that's important, for our kids too.
Lindsay mentioned that sometimes there's good shows that you can show your children. One movie that we like is Inside Out. I do recommend it. It's a good movie for kids, and it touches on this subject. Daniel Tiger addresses kids' emotions well. It has some great songs that helps kids put language to their emotion. That we have that comment from Lindsay. And Samantha mentioned that she used Inside Out and has seen it as well. It's a good movie. I recommend it.
Really good. When it first came out, and I went and I watched it, I was obsessed with it. Like, I love it. I think it's so great because, you know, especially with children's movies, I feel like they don't necessarily always touch on emotional intelligence and emotional regulation and just anything mental health related in that area. So I thought that was really awesome. That was a good one. Lindsay, yeah, it was sad. The end got me. Oh, that was a good one. Okay, thanks for sharing, everybody. Those are all really good ones. So connecting with your children, you know, in that height of emotion, especially if there's some type of argument or frustration, you know, the hardest thing sometimes can be to step back, even, you know, as an adult, to step back from our emotions. But I think that it's really good to just connect first. You know, even I put a hug can go a long way. And I think that that's so true because sometimes our kids just need to feel connected with us. You know, just starting that connection, giving a hug, you know, I hear you, I see you, I understand what you're going through. And then we can kind of go from there and start to problem solve. But if they're in that height of the emotion and they're screaming and crying and, you know, they're not ready to talk, then trying to identify an emotion is, you know, not going to happen right away. So kind of making that connection to try to get them grounded back to, you know, somewhat of a level with you to where that conversation can be had. And so, you know, I just was curious, you know, what are some ways that you guys connect with your children? In our household, it's definitely a hug. A hug is our ground level in my house, but curious to see, you know, how you guys do it too. So Chrissy mentioned one-on-one time, even if it's just an hour. I think that's really important too, especially with siblings in the house. Yeah, newborn. Oh, yeah, that could definitely be challenging.
I found it really helpful to just simply slow down. Sometimes we're so busy and our kids are excited about something or they want to confide in us. And it may seem trivial to us, but to them it's a big deal. And you know, that eye contact and letting them know that they have your attention, even if it's for just those few minutes when they're trying to tell you something, really does mean a lot to them.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Just speaking right back in the chat.
Lindsay mentioned that she loves to connect at the end of the day. Bedtime, my kids don't really, my kids don't really like to answer specific questions, but I love to hear what's on their mind right as they go to bed. Oh, I like that. That's sweet. Kind of like a recap of the day. Thank you.
I think that's me. I think I might be the same as your kids. I'm like, as soon as I decide to go to bed is when I have all these thoughts and I'm like, so, you know, I was thinking, and it's like the worst time because it's like right before bed. That's definitely me. But, you know, anytime that you can find that connection, I'm like at end of the night kind of person too. So I get that. Hugs for sure. Going Gabby's not wanting a hug because she's worried about, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. You know, Sam mentioned having her touch her nose to calm down, that reconnection. Yeah, definitely. One thing that I loved when I was especially teaching preschool was it was to blow the candle. So here's your candle and you would have to like blow the flame out of the candle, and that's like practicing taking deep breaths and things like that. So that simple just grounding reconnection I think is really great. Thanks for sharing, Sam. All right, so another thing, you know, to practice that, also that connection to where you can start to have that emotional regulation is creating a safe space for emotions. You know, especially I think as adults and children, I think any stage in our life, you have to feel safe in an environment before you're ready to share. You know, if you're in the height of your own emotion and you're not in a place that you feel comfortable, or you feel like you can share or you can express how you're feeling, then that kind of doesn't get you very far. So having that safe space, whether that's with you, maybe you're the safe space. Maybe if, you know, there's a high emotion at home, maybe their bed or their room is a safe space. Everybody works a little bit different, but just creating somewhere where your children can even go just to process their emotions. I think that's good depending on the situation to kind of let them process on their own. I know in our household, sometimes we get so, you know, worked up on things, and sometimes our kids aren't ready to talk right away. Sometimes they need that time to just sit and process their emotion and think about how they're feeling, and then we can kind of revisit a conversation of that emotional regulation and where to go from there, but kind of creating that time for them. Just peeking back in the chat. All right. And then just simply accepting our child's feelings. You know, sometimes we have days where there's more negative emotions, and sometimes we have days where there's more positive emotions, but kind of just practicing that acceptance that, you know, our children are human just as much as we are, and they're not always going to be happy every second of every day, and that, you know, it's okay to feel angry. It's just more of the reaction when we're angry. So practicing that emotional regulation of, you know, it's okay that I'm upset and it's okay that I'm angry, but how I'm reacting to this emotion is what matters the most. So kind of just normalizing those emotions for our children too.
So we're gonna go in a little bit into some coping mechanisms and strategies that could help with both our children and ourselves as adults. When you are aiming to coach your child through self-regulation, it's essentially a three-step process. You want to help them identify the emotion. Sometimes simply labeling the emotion can help build their emotional vocabulary and lead them to become a little bit more self-reflective. Understanding triggers, what triggered the emotion? Where did it come from? Exactly what happened? How did you feel? You could ask them to rate the intensity of the emotion. Are they very, very angry or simply a little annoyed? How did your body feel? How did you respond? What did you do? When we are able to kind of see what the trigger was, we can come up with an appropriate response. You can work with your child to come up with activities that can be used to manage, especially those strong emotions. You want to place these ideas that you come up with in an accessible area for them to use as needed. It's important to try many different things. Not any one thing is going to work for one child. And, you know, if you have a plan and you have these ideas set in place and you practice, it could make things go a little bit smoother when the time comes. Sometimes emotions such as anger or anxiety might point to more serious issues that require professional intervention. So don't hesitate to seek help if you think you need it or if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed. We have a question. Do we have any books to recommend for toddlers learning to identify what emotions are? There are so many good resources out there. We have put together a handful of resources that we're going to put into the chat box if you guys are interested. It's a document that you could look at and click on the links. And if you have more questions, you can always give us a call or come in and, you know, talk to us and see if we can be of more support.
See, Lindsay just threw that
So Lindsay has put that into the chat now, and you guys could take a look at that and save that just whenever you're ready. Some appropriate activities that could help your kids. We have some visual activities ideas here. such as a sand timer, looking at a fountain, a sensory jar that they could make could be helpful and calming to look at. Sometimes blowing bubbles, coloring an intricate mandala, music and reading could be good. Favorite toys, hugs and cuddles could always be comforting. If your child is more physical or if they're experiencing anger, it could help for them to release that anger in a physical way. They could try jumping rope, doing jumping jacks. You could ask them to practice pushing against the wall if they tend to maybe push on you or their siblings. Stress balls, slime, chewing gum, having something crunchy, sour, or cold. This has actually helped me with my daughter when she had tantrums when she was a little bit younger. It really did help to offer her a cold glass of water. For some reason, that sensation and taking that time to sip on the water really helped ease her out of that zone. And practicing mindfulness activities such as meditation that help the child and yourself focus on the present could also be very helpful.
I think it's really interesting, what works for everybody. As you mentioned, your daughter does the cold water and everything. And I think that really kind of brings out like our learning styles too. And, for a visual person or, maybe songs are better for us if we're an audio learner. So it's just kind of interesting. I love that to hear, what kind of works for everybody too.
Lindsay mentioned that her daughter's therapist helped her create an anger box, including slime, a favorite book, soft fabric, candy, hard candy, so that she could have a variety of tools to use when she was upset. And kind of like we mentioned, I'm guessing this box was accessible at any point in time that her daughter could have, reached for it when she needed to.
Yeah, I love that. It's awesome.
How do our emotions as parents affect our children? There's been plenty of research that suggests children are very receptive to our own emotions as their caregivers. It was found that difficulties in regulating our emotions is associated with irritability in our children. Mothers who had higher levels of psychological distress and emotion regulation difficulties had children with higher levels of difficulty. The good news is typically children tend to become less irritable as they get older.
So I just want to jump into the chat really quick. There is a question that, is there an age range we might consider the need for professional help or counseling? So just to kind of touch on this, I think it really depends on the age of your child and kind of the situation, what those emotions might be and kind of the more surrounding issues or, concerns, that are kind of going on. I think it really depends. Some things are age appropriate and some things are expected throughout different stages of child development. So I think it really just depends. Sometimes things don't necessarily show up that might be concerning until even later in life. So I think it really depends. A resource that we actually do have here in office is our ASQs, which are assessments that you can come in and do with us, with a family advocate, any three of us, and we can sit down with you, and it's a series of questions about your child, and you can kind of fill that out, and then we just kind of see, how everything's going, depending on the behaviors and the age of your child, then it can kind of help investigate a little bit more on, where your child's at developmentally, and if some of those behaviors are appropriate for that age. So yeah, like I said, it kind of just depends on the situation, but yeah, that's something that we do offer. If that's something you're interested in, you can always reach out to.
I think another important point to probably make in regards to that question is if, your child is hurting themselves or others, it could, be a sign that you should possibly find some professional help. It's something that has become more prevalent in our society that we've unfortunately noticed these days. And if, it's their depression or anxiety is really preventing them from carrying out basic life activities.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I jump in for just a minute too?
Yeah, Lindsay, go ahead.
I'd love to share. My daughter started seeing a therapist when she was only about I think she was just barely 8, or she might have still been 7 when we went to the pediatrician and kind of explained a couple of things that were going on that were new behaviors. And the pediatrician was especially looking at, these were like kind of dramatic changes that were happening that were very out of character. So he was looking for this like big change in her behavior and wanted to get out in front of that and see if she needed additional support. And I would say the other thing, 8 is pretty young to go to a therapist. I felt like, oh, she's very young, to do this. But she also could articulate to me that she felt like she needed help, like controlling her emotions, understanding her emotions, even more than what we had been trying to do. So I think it's also great to listen to our kids' cues, because sometimes they might be sending us a message like, I feel like I need more help, like if they're wanting to talk to someone else besides just us. I think it's great for us as parents to say, okay, we're trying to do everything we can for you, but you need more support too. So let's go try to find that.
Yeah. And my motto, just to kind of tag off of, what Lindsay said too, is my motto is kind of like, it can never hurt. I think like having somebody else and, even just being a middleman, sometimes our kids just need to vent. And, Lindsay mentioned, somebody else and maybe receiving more support. I think that it's always great, throughout every stage of life. And I don't think that, it could ever do harm. I think that, it's always good. And, if it's a concern and there's no concern from a counselor or therapist, then, you're where you should be. If not, at least we're taking that preventative precaution to kind of get on top of things too. So, one thing also is modeling healthy emotional management. So, one of the #1 ways that kids can learn is through modeling. I'm sure everybody's noticed that our kids repeat everything that we say, and they repeat all these little behaviors. We're like, oh, you got that from me. So if we can be, in touch with our emotions and we can kind of practice that emotional regulation, then it kind of lets our kids notice like, hey, if I take a step back like that, then maybe I could do it too. So, learning and modeling healthy coping skills too can kind of help them to want to get on board with it too. And even just, as I mentioned in the beginning, even, as infants, just explaining to them, oh, it's such a happy day, or, this movie made me really sad. So they're kind of seeing how we're feeling, and then they can label their emotions a little bit better too.
So when it comes to our self-regulation as adults and the parents, a few key terms that I want to touch on. Reappraisal is changing the way we think about a situation in order to redirect our emotional response. This is a positive self-regulation technique. It's associated with greater life satisfaction. Dysregulation, once again, is the inability to use healthy strategies to moderate negative emotions. And sometimes we also unconsciously suppress or inhibit our outward expression of emotions. This could lead to anxiety, depression, illness, or even substance abuse.
Yeah, it's kind of like that bottling up emotion where, you have all these emotions and you're like, it's fine, it's all good. And then all of a sudden you're at the grocery store and you're like crying over like a banana or something, kind of like suppressing those emotions. And all of a sudden, they come out in ways where you're just like, whoa, where did that come from? So, as Claudia mentioned, kind of getting on top of how we're feeling in the moment so we can identify it and find a solution for it too.
So reappraisal, want to talk a little bit more about that. Essentially, when something happens and it's causing a strong reaction, negative reaction within us, sometimes you might have used this technique unconsciously or consciously. Anytime you reframe and think about a benefit of that experience, you are using this reappraisal technique. Examining the evidence during a challenging situation could also be helpful. When I say examine the evidence, when we think about a difficult circumstance, we are able to make the best of that situation, remind ourselves that, you know, not every feeling that we're feeling, not everything that is going through our head is a fact. Or when we identify extreme language, such as, I always mess up, or I will never get through this. When you start to be conscious of these patterns, you can stop and maybe redirect yourself. One example could be maybe you didn't do so good on a work project. It could be helpful to consider all the other things that you have excelled in at work and what you learned from that experience, how you can make things better next time.
I love that, kind of focusing on, you know, where we can improve and where we can learn. And yeah, I love that, Claudia. That's really great. Be kind to yourself.
We have some comments from Christy. She mentioned that sometimes children being forced into counseling at a young age can honestly hurt them. Yeah, it's important to listen to our children and really get to know them, and that's a valid concern for sure.
Yeah.
She mentioned that she homeschooled her boys and a few lessons on emotions and feelings, as well as in groups. She has books and links that she can share with us. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you.
So here are some examples of emotion regulation strategies. We have the healthier type of strategies. You can call up a friend. Journaling can be very therapeutic for some people. Exercise will build up those good feelings. Meditation, you know, being mindful. Therapy, seeking therapy, even just to vent, or if you're feeling overwhelmed, could be helpful. Taking breaks when needed in our personal lives with our children, whatever it may be. Some unhealthy strategies that people tend to lean on sometimes could be physical, verbal aggression, avoiding or withdrawing within ourselves, abuse of substances and alcohol. Sometimes even when you're spending too much time on social media, it could be a way of you trying to regulate a negative emotion. And self-injury, unfortunately, has also been used as a coping mechanism. One thing I wanted to see and get some feedback, if you guys would be so kind to share, what other strategies have you found to be helpful for yourself? Chrissy mentioned that putting her boys in sports helped their emotions and feelings, especially since they were homeschooled.
Yes, I just saw Lindsay's about grounding, which is having your bare feet on the grass and everything. And I absolutely love that. I totally agree with that, Lindsay. It's really great. I know I used to love that. And then I moved up here and it was so cold because I grew up at the beach, and I moved up here and the ground was so different that it was hard to be barefoot, but there's definitely still places to do that. Soaking in a tub.
Soaking in a tub, listening to music. Prioritizing yourself and engaging in your hobbies. Yes. I like that. That's awesome.
We were just talking about that
today. Taking time for ourselves is important.
Yeah, talking about that self-care. Yeah, that's awesome. I do have to say, soaking in the tub with music, that's also one thing that I love too. Okay. Thanks for sharing, everybody. So these are the resources that Claudia had mentioned earlier. These are in the chat. These are some things that Lindsay had in that document. Just some resources. Sesame Street has some really good lessons on feelings and emotions, PBS Kids. So there's a lot of resources in there. So if anybody's interested, that link is in the chat too. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and once again, there's so many, we have put together some of those resources for you, but there's really a lot of information out there. We have really only touched on, the basics. It's important to, try to look into it and practice being mindful and practice these skills within yourself and your children. Life skill, like Ashley had mentioned. Does anybody have any questions or comments to share? Thank you.
Thanks for coming. And again, we have some of those resources in here. So, if anybody has any questions or you're just curious to kind of see where your child's at developmentally, you can come in and we can do an ASQ together. It's free. You can come on in and just out of curiosity and check it out. So we're always here if anybody needs us.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in one of those emotion charts and you want us to print one out and come pick it up at the office, we're happy to do that too, and just want to facilitate our little kiddos in the mountains getting the healthy start to.
I think Lindsay cut out just a little bit. Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, definitely. We're here for you guys for anything that you need. All right. So just real quick, just something to, also you're gonna pick up a photo chart, sweet. So we will be here, I will be here in the morning. So if you wanna call us here in the office, I can throw our number into the chat, or if you just wanna come by in the morning, then I can definitely print one out for you. If you wanna call and set up an appointment, we can do that too. So I just want to throw this in here real quick. There is a website if you're interested in some more information regarding a vaccine, and you can go ahead and go to that link and find out some more information on that too.
Also, I want to remind you guys about our Family Success Coaching Program. It provides a family advocate for yourself, personalized family assistance, priority access to our resources, priority access to these workshops, for example, help with any of your goals, tracking developmental milestones, home visits, and help with supplies. If you're interested, you can call us or send us a message on Facebook. We would love to hear from you.
Right, thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.